Seller disclosure of property condition is a form that is legally required for the seller to fill out prior to listing a home, or the buyer is required to receive prior to purchasing a home. So there's a lot of blanks on this form and a lot of questions that can come up around this form. So I'll do my best to walk you through each section of that and make sure that there's no confusion or missing pieces. So first thing to notate is that on the first page, right at the very top, there are two lines for the property address. Right above the second line is the date of the purchase. So when did the seller buy the home, and the date that this form is being filled out. So make sure that whenever you are representing a seller who is filling this form out, and they manually have a hard copy of this to fill out, that they don't write present in this form. I see a lot of these where it says date of purchase 2015, date of this form present. Well, it's been on the market for 6 months. Was it present as of today, or was it present 6 months ago? So just make sure that your clients put in an actual date right there. So scrolling down, the first page is the hardest page to fill out as a seller because it asks the most questions about the systems of your home. The question that is presented throughout, and then of course right up here it explains what the purpose of this seller disclosure is, that the sellers have an obligation to fill this out truthfully and honestly. But there is also a section where the seller can refuse to fill this out, and we can get to that here in just a minute. If there is any additional pages that are needed due to warranties or space or whatever, then you can add additional pages just to make sure that everything you need to disclose is disclosed. There are things that are not going to apply to every home, like not every home has a fireplace or a sprinkler system, so that will be an NA option. If the seller truly has no knowledge, they will select unknown. And then the question is, are there any past or current problems relating to any of the following things? So yes, there is a past or current problem. No, there is not. Or I have no idea if there ever was. Or this does not apply to me. So like I said, the first page is the hardest to fill out because it's the most systems. As a note, if you're sitting with a seller filling this form out and they say, well, what about this? What about this? The answer is always yes. It is better to over-disclose than to under-disclose. So I always tell sellers if they're filling out the form and they ever have any questions about, well, should I explain about this? Yes. The answer is yes. You don't ever want to be responsible for a problem that comes up and then the seller said, well, my agent told me I didn't need to disclose that. So always over-disclose. You can fill out anything along the lines if people need to fill things out. So for instance, if there was a leak under their kitchen sink that they repaired 2 weeks ago, they can say repaired leak under kitchen sink 2 weeks ago. However, if there's not enough room on this little line or this little space down here at the bottom, page 4 of this form has a box that they can fill in for additional information. And of course, if they need to attach an additional blank page to make sure everything they need to say is said, they can certainly do that as well. So once you get through the house systems, you move on to the basement and the foundation. So if there is no basement on the home, obviously NA. However, if there is any basement or foundation things that need to be addressed, here's the space to do that. The sellers will initial on every single page, and they will also date and time every single page, as will the buyers when they review this. Now, if I'm a buyer agent looking at this form, the first thing I tell my buyers is I want to look for everything that's checked in the yes column, because that means there's either something good or bad that has happened to that. So a yes that is good could be, yes, our furnace went out and we replaced it last month. So that's a good yes. So I always look for things in the yes column because that triggers me to ask another question about what's happening or to look closer at a specific item. Okay. So moving on to page 2, notice that the address block is on the top of every single page. And after you get through the basement and the foundation, you move on to the roof. It's a pretty self-explanatory form from here. And like I said, it does get easier for the seller as it goes on. So land and drainage, if you are in a flood zone, this is where that will be notated. So always pay attention to these yeses in this page just to make sure, double, triple check that the house you are buying is not in a flood zone if you are not expecting it to be in a flood zone. Boundaries, is there fencing, is there surveys, things like that. 9 times out of 10, probably even higher than that, maybe like 9.5 times out of 10, the source of the water is going to be the city water for wherever you're purchasing. Every now and then you might see some well water, so be on the lookout for that if you're looking at rural properties. Down at the bottom of page 2 is how is the sewer system set up. So most metro properties are going to be on city sewers. However, once you start getting out into the country and even some weird little patches of St. Matthews, you're going to be on a septic system. So just be aware of which box is checked yes here. Is it on city sewers, or is there a septic system installed, and when was the last time that was cleaned? Note the seller initials and buyer initials and date and time. So whichever party you're representing, make sure these are filled out appropriately. On to page 3, obviously the address up there at the top again. Construction remodeling, and then if so, were there any permits that were needed or pulled? If you are in a homeowners association, or if you're not sure based on the MLS, a quick little hack is to go to the seller disclosure form and go to page 3, section 9, and see if there is a homeowners association that is due for the property that you're in. And if the answer is yes, and it's a neighborhood, it might be a good idea to ask the listing agent for any appropriate bylaws or rules or regulations that are in place. So that way your sellers can know prior to purchasing if they're allowed to park their boat there, or if they're allowed to put up a shed or a garage, or if they're allowed to put up fencing. So this is a good box to look for a yes checked into it if you aren't sure. The rest of this is just miscellaneous information. Is there radon, or has there been radon? Termites or other wood destroying insects? Is it a meth house? Were there pets? Has it been destroyed by fire? So all kinds of different questions. Is there legal action like foreclosure against the property? So again, look for the yeses and see if there's anything that's triggered there that would make you want to ask a deeper question. And of course, initials and date and time for both buyer and seller. And then finally on the 4th page is one last spot for an address and that space for additional information. Now, if your seller was a willing participant in filling out your seller disclosure form, they will sign right at this top line right here. This block you want to avoid because this says that you have filled out this seller's disclosure form on behalf of the seller. Now, there's liability that comes with that says, well, I didn't tell her to put that, or I didn't tell him to mark that box, or he heard me incorrectly, or whatever. So if a seller asks you to fill out a seller disclosure form, kindly decline and say that they need to fill it out themselves, or if they are unwilling to fill this form out, then they will sign down here below where it says the seller has refused to complete this form and refused to acknowledge his failure to complete this form, or a seller has refused to complete this form and acknowledge that the real estate agent shall so inform the buyer. So they will sign either one of these blocks if they don't wish to fill out the disclosure form. Right here at the very bottom, the buyer is acknowledging that they have seen and received this form, and then everybody initials once again on page 4.